Hey everyone, welcome to A Fistful of Dice. My name is Matt. Today we're going to be doing a quick review of Adventures in Middle-earth Player's Guide for 5th Edition Dungeons & Dragons. I have loved Middle-earth for as long as I can remember. When I was very, very young, my dad read The Hobbit and then later The Lord of the Rings with me. And as I was sort of becoming a teenager, the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. Being able to see a world of fantasy come to life in front of me was huge. It was really, really important to me, and to this day, I adore the Lord of the Rings movies, and I become even more and more engrossed in Middle-earth and the lore and the history behind it and the different things that are going on in that world. And I have a real reverence for the setting, and it's always been something that I wanted to experience in a role-playing game. And I've looked at things like the One Ring and different systems like that, but nothing has really given me the opportunity to play in this world quite like Adventures in Middle-earth has, because it's using a rule system that I am already intimately familiar with and can easily find players for. Adventures in Middle-earth is published by Cubicle 7 Entertainment, the guys behind the Doctor Who RPG and the aforementioned One Ring RPG. The One Ring is a fantastic system that I have unfortunately not had the chance to play as of yet, but I do own the rule books and have enjoyed reading them quite a bit. Cubicle 7 has captured Middle-earth in the One Ring very perfectly, and I'm happy to say that I was hesitant about this, but they have absolutely captured the spirit of Middle-earth in the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set with Adventures in Middle-earth. So, as I said, Adventures in Middle-earth is basically Lord of the Rings for Dungeons & Dragons. They're doing this through the open gaming license that Wizards of the Coast recently unveiled for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that allows publishers to release third-party content for 5th edition, and also utilize the existing rules and framework for how classes, races, backgrounds, all of that kind of stuff works. The book starts with an overview of the region of Middle-earth known as the Wilderlands, and the Wilderlands is the area surrounding the Lonely Mountain. And the basic idea is that it sort of takes place between the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. So Smaug the dragon has been defeated. It's the lead up to the War of the Ring. The world of Middle-earth is experiencing a great upheaval with the passing of the elves, the fading of the dwarves, and the rise of men. Lots of systems are doing this now where they focus on a very specific time period, such as Edge of the Empire focusing on the time between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. That's not to say that you can't use this system for pretty much anything in Middle-earth, but the lore presented and the way that the cultures sort of interact with each other, the equipment available to you, the level of magic that exists is specifically tied to this time and this region. The Wilderland is a very cool area of Middle-earth. It lacks sort of the big grand cities of other places in Middle-earth, but things like Mirkwood, Rivendell are all here. There's lots of sort of borderland towns and shadowy places to go adventuring in. So it's ripe for that D&D experience, I think. I think they've picked a good region for that. After they give a really thorough overview of the Wilderlands and the different adventuring locations, the towns and the cultures that live there, we delve right into the cultures, which are basically the races of Adventures in Middle-earth. There are 11 cultures available in Adventures in Middle-earth, and they include things like elves of Mirkwood, dwarves of Erebor, Bjornings, men from Minas Tirith, as well as Rohan. There's a lot of variety in the races that are presented here, and all of them have a great combination of role-play abilities as well as mechanical combat exploration focused abilities as well. One of the big differences between the way that cultures and races work is that culture actually gives you equipment. Most of your equipment is going to come from your culture. It gives you things like cloak, clothing, adventuring gear. There's also something called a standard of living that all the cultures get, and this basically denotes how well off the culture is. You know, the dwarves of Erebor, who have recently retaken the Lonely Mountain and have all of this gold and riches at their disposal, are going to be a very opulent sort of well-off culture, whereas someone like a Bjorning or a woodsman of the Wilderlands is going to be less so, more living off the land, getting by with what they have. Next are the classes, and the classes represent everything from wandering healers and scholars to rage-filled berserkers to ranger-type characters, almost like Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings. And you have your basic sort of D&D-esque classes like a warrior and a burglar, things like that, that present different options for the adventurer. The interesting thing about Adventures in Middle-earth is that there's hardly any magic. There's no casting classes, really. There are certain virtues that you can take later on through being an elf and things like that that allow you to do magic-like things, but there's no spell list here. There's no wizard class. There's no inherent magic in the world because wizards are godlike beings, and no one is capable of just doing magic outright. To sort of fill the void of a low magic system in a D&D game, they've included really awesome rules for non-magical healing. Classes like the Scholar can collect different herbs and also use their hit die to heal people and help them recover from different conditions. I like this so much that it's something that I would consider including in any D&D game, not just Adventures in Middle-earth, because I've long wanted there to be some sort of way for characters who are not capable of magical healing to do things like collect herbs and create healing drafts and poultices and things like that. The classes as well get some pretty cool roleplay oriented abilities that are less steeped in mechanics and more tuned to something that you can do through social interaction, exploration, and things like that. Each class has specialties as well, which are kind of like the archetypes in 5th edition, where once you reach a certain level, you can branch off and focus in different areas. One of the things that really caught my eye when I was first reading through the book was I was looking at the warrior class, and one of the specialties is called Weapon Master. And when you take this Weapon Master specialty, you get to create sort of an artifact weapon. And for all intents and purposes, it's a +1 weapon, but you give it a name, and later on it develops different abilities. And that felt really cool and very Middle-earth to me, because it was less like, here's a magic sword, and more like, this is an heirloom. This is a weapon that has been around for centuries, if not millennia, and over the years it has developed its own abilities and power, and it's steeped in old magic. And I really liked that. I was able to create a warrior with a magic sword, and it just felt like Middle-earth to me. Next up are virtues, which is one of the biggest departures from standard 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It's also one of my favorite things about Adventures in Middle-earth. Virtues are feat-like abilities. They are things that you can take as a character that go beyond your race and class. Having said that, most of the virtues are going to be tied to your culture. There are some generic virtues that any character can take, but most of the virtues are going to be tied to your culture, and they're things that only that culture can take. So for instance, if you're a dwarf of the Lonely Mountain, you can have a pet raven that you can summon to you and use it to carry messages and do things like scout for you, which is really, really cool. Or if you're an elf of Mirkwood, you can gain some magic-like abilities that allow you to do things like conjure light, that are more mystical in nature and less high-powered magic, but they're very utilitarian and they will see a lot of use in the game, I'm sure. The virtues are much more integral to the system. They feel less like an add-on or like an optional thing like the feats are in 5th edition. They are necessary. They are absolutely part of this system and something that should be utilized in your game. And I think that you'll find that you and your players will be very excited by the different options that are presented in the virtues. Because one of the big complaints about 5th edition is that the characters can feel a little samey in terms of mechanics and the things they can do. The virtues allow you to create a very unique character that can do different things without it becoming crunchy or overwhelming like it would in a system like 3rd edition. I think Cubicle 7 has taken the idea of feats and really just upped the ante, taken it to the next level, and really streamlined it and perfected it. Now, next up are the backgrounds, which was a very surprising chapter for me. In 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, the backgrounds are things like orphan, hermit, sailor. Very self-explanatory things that you're looking through and you go, oh, I bet my guy was a soldier. In Adventures in Middle-earth, they're much more flavorful and tied to the setting. Things like Harrowed, someone who experiences prophetic dreams and finds themselves willed, like just sort of towards this destiny. Or the Oathsworn, who are sworn to carry out some sort of promise that they have made to themselves or to somebody else. And like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, the backgrounds also include some different personality traits, strengths, and flaws that you can either roll for or choose that give your character a little bit more flavor and background character. Next up, we have the equipment section. There's nothing super new or exciting in this section. They have reflavored a lot of the equipment from standard Dungeons and Dragons to be more in line with Middle-earth. So for instance, instead of a longbow, you have a great bow, and instead of a long sword, you have a broadsword. The armor is named differently too, and there's some different options in there. There are 2 new weapon and armor options. There's the Great Shield, which is a shield that is larger and affords greater protection, which is something that I think 5th edition definitely needs. And I've included different shield options in some of my settings. There's also the Mattock, which is a dwarven weapon that is derived from the Iron Hills, where they were sort of farmers. And it's essentially a bladed hoe that you can use as a weapon. And I think that's really cool that they included that. There's also some very Middle-earthy things here, like those healing herbs, tool proficiency with pipe, different kinds of pipe smoke, and things like that. So it's definitely flavored to be like Middle-earth, but there's nothing here that is super different from 5th edition. In place of magic items, there are things called heirlooms, which are, again, tied to the different cultures. These heirlooms you can acquire through adventuring and discovering them, but you can also create a character that has an heirloom through the use of those virtues that we were talking about earlier. Now, after the equipment section, I feel like the book really opens up and we see just how different Adventures in Middle-earth is from standard 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. The next chapter is all about journeys, which is about travel. And there are rules for travel in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. There are rules for how far you can go in a day, difficult terrain, forced march, levels of exhaustion, things like that. But Adventures in Middle-earth makes traveling more like an encounter. When your party in Adventures in Middle-earth decides to go out on a quest, they have to look at a map and chart their course. They have to decide which route are we going to take. This has always been really important in stories like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, where they're taking different routes, and in The Lord of the Rings they go one way, but then they get cut off by Saruman and they have to go through the mines of Moria, things like that. This has always been sort of a running thing in Middle-earth, this idea that things are very hard to get to and travel is very difficult and arduous. So Adventures in Middle-earth puts a huge focus on this, and it has resulted in a system that I think is one of the coolest things I've seen come from the Open Gaming license for 5th edition. Once your party has chosen their route on the map, they choose roles. Each member of the party gets a different role that they're going to be in charge of for the journey, things like scout, guide, hunter, things like that, so that when obstacles get in the way, those characters will know who's in charge of doing. And there's a bunch of roll tables for things that can happen during those journeys. You can get attacked by enemies. There can be flash flooding, inclement weather. You can run across different obstacles that you then have to contend with. You have to work together and overcome. And I think that's really cool. And as somebody who has, unfortunately, glossed over travel and the journey a lot in the past in Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, focusing more on the destination. This has really sort of given me a lot of ideas for how you can use the journey and make it a challenge. And again, this is a system of rules that you can use in any D&D game, not just one set in Middle-earth. If you were running a game that was sailors on the high seas, think about giving each character a different role on the ship. There's the helmsman, the watcher, somebody in charge of rigging the sails, things like that. And each character is in charge of that thing so that when something comes up, they know what they need to do. They know what checks they need to make. And it just makes everything feel more like a team, like you're needed on this journey. It also makes it very clear that it's dangerous to travel alone in Middle-earth. I think for me, the Journeys chapter is probably my favorite one, and it's the one that's going to see the most use for me, because not only am I going to use it in Adventures in Middle-earth, but I'm going to use it in all of my D&D games. The next chapter is all about the Shadow, and the Shadow is sort of this idea, this theme of corruption in Middle-earth, right? This is something else that is very integral to the setting of Middle-earth. It's something that runs throughout all of Tolkien's works, including the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings. There is no alignment in Adventures in Middle-earth. Barker will be very happy about that. In place of alignment, there is this idea of the shadow and corruption. Each character starts out good-natured, wanting to do good, with a general sort of helpful outlook. But through witnessing different events, traveling through blighted lands, and doing misdeeds, bad stuff, they can acquire corruption or shadow, which can eventually lead to debilitating effects, including conditions and also madness. The shadow points are tied to your wisdom score, so the higher your wisdom, the more shadow you need to acquire before you start suffering negative effects. So for instance, if you're a character with an average wisdom and you're carrying around a tainted item like a ring or a dagger or something like that is tied to evil, that has an evil sort of air about it, you're going to slowly accrue shadow that is going to corrupt you and lead to some negative effects. But that's not to say that you want to avoid shadow altogether, because it presents lots of cool roleplay opportunities and it's not a permanent thing. There are ways to recover from this corruption. The next chapter is about audiences, and I was a little confused about what this chapter is going to be about when I was reading through the table of contents, but what it basically is it's a set of rules that go deeper into acquiring an audience with different cultures. So this, again, is a big thing in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, where it's like, you can't just walk into town and talk to somebody important. You have to go through the proper channels. You have to be on good terms with that culture. So, for instance, when Gandalf shows up at Edoras and they don't want Gandalf in there talking to Theoden, and they're like, the hour is late, Gandalf Stormcrow, and they tell him to go away. Stuff like that is what Audiences is all about. The Audiences is a cool idea. It's not super fleshed out like the Journeys is, but it does present some cool options, including ways that you can achieve titles by doing different things and becoming friends with a different culture. So, like, you can become an elf friend. I saw that. I was geeking out so hard. I was like, that's what I want. I want to be an elf friend. Finally, the last chapter is about the Fellowship phase. The Fellowship phase is basically the phase that comes after the adventure. It's reminded me a lot of the Torchbearer RPG, where there's time in between adventures where you're doing things like healing wounds, recovering from different conditions, training, improving, running a business on the side, things like that. The idea is that Adventures in Middle-earth, there might be months or even years in between those different quests and adventures that you're doing. You might go home to your family in between these adventures. So that's the content of the book. Let's talk about some of the other stuff that's going on here. I think the layout of the book is great. It's stylized. It has some texture to the background, some really cool graphics that are going on in the header and footer, but it's very readable. The color, the size of the font is just about perfect, and I found myself reading it comfortably on the screen in PDF and also printed out in hard copy. If you're looking for a full game experience with Adventures in Middle-earth, you're not going to get it with this book. There's no monsters in this book, and there's no adventures presented here either. So they are coming out with a Lore Keeper's Guide later this year. I believe it's going to be coming out in November when the hard copies come out. That will present some different rules and some monsters and things like that. Until then, you can just get by using the monsters from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, either the monster manual if you have it, or the basic rules, which are free online. You will also need to learn and understand the 5th edition rule set before you play this game. This doesn't include the rules in total. This is merely an add-on to the 5th edition Player's Handbook. So if you have the free basic rules online or the Player's Handbook, like I mentioned, this will be in addition to those rules. The basic rules of 5th edition are not laid out in this book. And honestly, I'm glad that they aren't, because it kind of would have cluttered it up and there would have been a lot of pages that I was just skipping over because I've read the Player's Handbook so many damn times. All in all, I think that Adventures in Middle-earth is a really exciting release. It's very well done, well written. I caught a few typos here and there inside the book, but nothing that breaks the book or made me, wince or anything like that. I think that this is kind of an indicator of a really bright future for 5th edition OGL products. I mean, this is really quality stuff that, as I'm reading through it, I'm getting really excited to run a game in Middle-earth, and I'm excited to play in Middle-earth, which I think is one of the biggest compliments that you can give an RPG book is, am I getting excited to play as I'm reading them? It captures Middle-earth as I know it perfectly. It felt like coming home. It felt like drinking a warm mug of tea, sitting with my furry feet up on a footstool somewhere. Beyond Middle-earth, this book offers really great options, rules, and mechanic ideas for any low magic setting. If you're wanting to run something a little bit darker, a little bit grittier with no casting classes, pick this book up. I think you'll be happy with the options presented here. I want to thank Cubicle 7 for sending me a copy of this book to look at, to read, and to run here on the channel. I'm looking forward to getting hard copies of both this book and the Lore Keeper's Guide later this year. Cubicle 7 has knocked it out of the park with this release. This is probably my favorite OGL release since the OGL came out. It feels the most complete, the most professional. I'm excited to play and run this. If you're interested in picking up Adventures in Middle-earth yourself, it's available on DriveThruRPG right now, as well as the Cubicle 7 website. I definitely recommend it, man. I can't recommend it enough. As always, everyone, thank you for watching. Take care. And keep it secret. Keep it safe.